Dean Martin lowered his glass mid-punchline, and the entire nightclub fell silent in less than 3 seconds. 5,000 people holding their breath at once. And wait, because what triggered that silence wasn't the joke he'd been building toward for the last 2 minutes, but a single frantic hand gesture from a man in the shadows no one else could see. The spotlight stayed locked on Dean's face, warm and unforgiving, but his eyes had already shifted left, just a flicker. Most of the audience didn't catch it. They were still waiting for the punchline, still leaning forward in their seats with smiles half-formed. But the people in the front row, the ones close enough to see the tiny crease between his eyebrows, they noticed something had changed. Write in the comments, where are you listening to this story from, and what time is it right now? The man signaling from the wings was Carl, the head technician, who'd worked this venue for 11 years and had never once interrupted a live performance. His arms were moving in sharp, deliberate patterns, up, down, across his chest, like he was trying to communicate in a language Dean didn't quite speak. And here's the part you really need to notice. Carl wasn't looking at Dean. He was looking past him, out into the dark mass of tables and bodies that filled the club from wall to wall. Dean kept his posture loose, his smile intact, but his mind was already racing through the possibilities. Fire, medical emergency, security threat, equipment failure about to drop 1,000 pounds of rigging onto the stage. He'd seen all of it before, over 2 decades of performing, and every performer's nightmare started exactly like this. Someone backstage breaking protocol, because the situation had already gone past the point where protocol mattered. The band behind him hadn't stopped playing. The piano was still rolling through the intro to the next number, the drums keeping time, the bass humming low and steady beneath it all. Dean could feel the rhythm in his chest, the way it always settled there during a show, grounding him even when everything else felt like it was starting to tilt. But now that rhythm felt wrong, out of sync with whatever Carl was trying to tell him without words. He turned back to the microphone and did what he'd trained himself to do in moments like this. He bought time. "You know," he said, his voice easy and warm, like he'd just thought of something funny. "I was gonna tell you about the time I tried to teach Frank Sinatra how to cook pasta, but now I'm thinking maybe we should just let the band play for a minute." The audience laughed, relieved, thinking this was part of the act. Dean lifted his glass in a small salute toward the pianist, who caught the cue and stretched the intro into a longer instrumental break. That gave Dean maybe 90 seconds. 90 seconds to figure out what Carl was signaling about, to decide whether to stop the show entirely or keep the room calm and handle it quietly. 90 seconds before the audience started to wonder why Dean Martin wasn't singing. He glanced toward the wings again, slower this time, like he was just casually checking the stage. Carl was still there, still moving his hands, but now he was pointing, not at the stage, not at Dean, but at the audience, specifically at the center section, maybe 10 rows back. And that's when Dean saw it, a shape darker than the rest, someone standing when everyone else was sitting, not moving, just standing there, perfectly still, in a way that made the people at the nearby tables start to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Dean had performed through hecklers, through power outages, through a night in Chicago, when someone in the balcony had thrown a bottle that shattered 3 feet from his shoes. But this felt different. This felt like something that required a decision, the kind of decision that years later, people would either remember as the night Dean Martin kept everyone safe, or the night he overreacted and killed the mood for no reason. The countdown started in his head, without him meaning to start it. The band would loop this intro twice, maybe 3 times if he pushed it, and then they'd have to either move into the verse or stop completely. That meant he had maybe 2 minutes total before he had to commit to a choice. 2 minutes to read a situation he couldn't fully see, in a room full of people who trusted him to keep the night exactly what they'd paid for. Smooth, effortless, fun. But here's what nobody in the audience understood yet. Dean Martin didn't get to where he was by ignoring signals. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, years ago, in a smaller club in a different city, when he'd seen something that looked wrong, and convinced himself it was nothing. Cleveland, 1954. A Tuesday night crowd, smaller than this one, maybe 800 people. He'd been younger then, still building his reputation, still worried about every little thing that might make him look unprofessional or difficult to work with. He'd noticed a woman in the fourth row who wasn't laughing when everyone else laughed, wasn't clapping when everyone else clapped, just sitting there with her hands gripping the edge of the table like she was holding on to keep from falling. Dean had seen it, had felt that little ping of concern in the back of his mind, but he'd told himself it was probably nothing. Maybe she'd had an argument with her husband before they came out. Maybe she just didn't like his act. Maybe she was tired. There were 1,000 explanations that didn't require him to stop the show and draw attention to something that might be perfectly fine. So he'd kept going, and 10 minutes later, she'd collapsed, and the whole room had descended into chaos. And by the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late for the simple intervention that might have saved her if someone had noticed sooner. The official cause was a stroke, something that probably couldn't have been prevented no matter what Dean did or didn't do. But he never forgot the look on her husband's face when the paramedics carried her out. That look of helpless, desperate regret that came from not recognizing the signs until it was too late. Dean had sworn to himself that night that he would never ignore that ping of concern again, never convince himself that keeping the show smooth was more important than keeping the people in the room safe. It had cost him a few performances over the years, nights where he'd stopped everything because of something that turned out to be nothing serious, but he'd rather err on the side of caution every single time. Better to look overly careful than to carry the weight of another face like that husband's, another night where he chose entertainment over intervention and someone paid the price. That night had ended with paramedics and police and a performer's worst fear, the knowledge that he could have stopped it sooner if he just trusted his gut instead of worrying about the show. He wasn't going to make that mistake twice. The glass in his hand was cold, slick with condensation, and Dean realized he'd been gripping it hard enough that his knuckles were starting to ache. He set it down on the piano with a soft clink that only the people closest to the stage could hear, and he turned his body just slightly, angling himself so he could see both Carl in the wings and the standing figure in the audience, without making it obvious that's what he was doing. The room smelled like cigarette smoke and expensive perfume, that particular mix you only got in high-end nightclubs, where people came to be seen as much as to listen. The air was thick with it, hanging in the spotlight beams like fog, and Dean could taste it on his tongue every time he breathed. Normally, he didn't notice it anymore. It was just part of the job, part of the atmosphere. But right now, with his senses dialed up and his focus narrowed, every detail felt sharp and intrusive. Listen closely to what happened next, because this is where the whole night pivoted on a single breath. Dean caught the eye of Tony, the band leader, and gave him a look that meant stretch it. Tony nodded, barely perceptible, and signaled the band to take it into a brief solo section. The saxophone player stepped forward, and the music shifted into something that could hold the audience's attention without Dean needing to be at the microphone. Dean used the moment to walk to the edge of the stage, moving with the same casual grace he always used, like he was just enjoying the music, maybe about to interact with someone in the front row. But what he was really doing was getting a better angle on that standing figure. 10 rows back, center section, a man in a dark suit, not moving, not sitting, just standing there with his hands at his sides, his face tilted up toward the stage. And even from this distance, Dean could see that something was wrong with the way he was standing. Too stiff, too still, like he was holding himself upright through sheer force of will. Like sitting down wasn't an option anymore because if he sat down he might not be able to get back up. And then the man's knees buckled. It happened fast. 1 second he was standing, the next he was dropping, and the people at his table lunged forward to catch him before he hit the floor. The tables around them erupted into motion, people standing up to see what was happening, voices rising in confusion and concern, and Dean felt the room's energy shift from entertained to anxious in the space of a heartbeat. Carl's signal finally made sense. Not a security threat, not a fire, a medical emergency, happening right there in the middle of the crowd, and Carl had spotted it from the tech booth before anyone else had realized how serious it was. Dean turned back to the microphone, and this time, when he spoke, his voice was calm but clear, cutting through the rising chatter. Folks, we're going to take a very brief pause here. Stay in your seats, enjoy your drinks, and we'll be right back with you. He signaled to the house lights operator, and the ambient lights came up just enough to make it easier for the venue's medical staff to navigate through the tables without causing a full-on panic. The band eased the music down to a soft background hum, something to keep the room from falling into dead silence, but quiet enough that people could hear if they needed to. Security was already moving through the crowd, along with 2 staff members Dean recognized as the venue's on-site first responders. They reached the man within seconds, and Dean watched from the stage as they knelt beside him, checking vitals, asking questions to the people at his table. The man was conscious. Dean could see that much. His head was moving, his hand lifted slightly as if to wave off the concern, but he wasn't getting up on his own. The audience was murmuring now. That low buzz of people trying to figure out what was happening and whether they should be worried. Dean could feel the mood in the room starting to fracture, the easy pleasure of the evening giving way to uncertainty. And this was the moment that separated a good performer from a great one, the ability to hold a room together even when the show had stopped. He stepped back to the microphone and spoke the way he'd speak to a friend sitting across a table. You know, in all my years doing this, I've learned something important. Sometimes the best part of a night out isn't the music or the jokes. It's knowing that when something matters, everybody in the room looks out for each other. That's what I'm seeing right now. And that's something special. His voice was steady, warm, with just enough weight behind it to let people know he was taking this seriously without making it sound like a crisis. Our team's taking care of things, and in just a few minutes we're gonna get back to having a great night together. So sit tight, take a breath, and know that we're all in good hands. The murmuring settled slightly. Not silence, but something closer to calm. People sat back down. Drinks were lifted. A few conversations started up at the tables nearest the exit, where folks always felt a little more nervous about these kinds of disruptions, but most of the room stayed put. Dean had given them permission to relax, and more importantly, he'd given them something to believe in, that this was under control, that the night wasn't ruined, that they could still have the evening they'd come here for. Behind him, Tony was keeping the band playing softly, just gentle instrumental background, and Dean turned to give him a small nod of thanks. Tony had been with him long enough to read these moments, to know when to step up and when to pull back, and right now, he was doing exactly what Dean needed him to do, keeping the music alive without letting it overwhelm the situation. Dean glanced toward the wings again. Carl was still there, but his hands were down now, his posture less frantic. He caught Dean's eye and gave a thumbs up. Staff had reached the guest. Situation was being handled. No need for a full evacuation. Dean felt something in his chest unclench slightly, that knot of tension he'd been carrying since the moment he first saw Carl's signal. Out in the audience, the first responders were helping the man to his feet, slowly, with one person on each side supporting his weight. He was walking, unsteady, but walking, and they were guiding him toward a side exit where he could get proper attention away from the crowd. His table companions were gathering their things to follow, and Dean could see relief on their faces, that particular expression people got when something scary had almost happened, but hadn't quite tipped over into disaster. Wait. Because what happened in the next 30 seconds is what everyone in that club would remember for years. Dean let the man and his group get almost to the exit, and then he raised his glass, the one he'd set down on the piano, and called out, his voice carrying across the room without the microphone. Hey, just that one word. But the entire club went quiet again. The man paused at the exit, turned back slightly, and Dean smiled. You take care of yourself, friend, and next time you come see us, the first drink's on me. The room erupted, not in nervous laughter or polite applause, but in genuine, warm, relieved appreciation. Because Dean had just done something most performers wouldn't think to do. He'd acknowledged the man directly, made him part of the story instead of an interruption to it, and he'd done it in a way that made everyone in the club feel like they'd witnessed something human and real, instead of just an awkward disruption to their entertainment. The man raised his hand in a small wave, half grateful and half embarrassed. And then he and his group disappeared through the exit. The door closed behind them, the house lights dimmed back down, and Dean turned back to the microphone, with that easy smile that made it look like nothing in the world could throw him off his game. All right, he said. And the band started building the intro back up. Where were we? Oh right, Frank Sinatra, pasta, and a kitchen fire that nobody talks about anymore. The audience laughed. The tension broke like a wave hitting the shore. And just like that, the night was back on track. Dean launched into the story he'd been setting up 5 minutes ago. His timing perfect, his delivery smooth. And if you didn't know what had just happened, you'd think the whole thing had been planned as part of the act. But the people in the front row knew better. They'd seen the way his eyes had changed when he first spotted Carl's signal. They'd watched him make a dozen tiny decisions in the span of 2 minutes, weighing the safety of one person against the comfort of 5,000, and they'd seen him thread that needle with the kind of grace that most people don't possess in the calm moments of their lives, let alone in the middle of a live performance with a spotlight in their face and a room full of expectations pressing down on them. Notice how the rest of the show unfolded, because this is where Dean Martin's real skill showed itself. He didn't rush through the next number. He didn't overcompensate with extra energy or try to bury what had just happened under a wall of jokes and songs. Instead, he let the show breathe. He took his time with the punchlines, let the band stretch out the instrumental breaks, engaged with the audience in little moments of improvisation that made each table feel like they were part of something intimate despite the size of the crowd. And somewhere around the third song after the interruption, the room forgot that there'd been an interruption at all. The mood lifted. The laughter came easier. People relaxed into their seats and their drinks and the music, and the night became exactly what it was supposed to be. A few hours of escape, elegance, and entertainment that they'd paid good money for, and that Dean Martin was determined to deliver. But backstage, during the brief intermission between sets, Carl found Dean in the hallway near the dressing rooms. The technician looked exhausted, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. I didn't know if you'd see me. I didn't know if I should have just called security straight away, instead of trying to signal you first. Dean set down his drink and looked at Carl for a long moment. You did exactly right, he said. You gave me a chance to keep the room calm while people got to him. That matters. Is he gonna be okay? Carl asked. Dehydration and maybe too much bourbon on an empty stomach, Dean said, scared him more than anything. But yeah, he'll be fine. Carl nodded. I've been doing this job for 11 years, and I've never had to make a call like that. Dean clapped him on the shoulder. You saw something that looked wrong. You trusted yourself, and you made sure someone knew about it. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. I can only do my job if people like you are paying attention and speaking up. So we make a good team, Carl said. We make a good team, Dean agreed. Now go get yourself a drink. You've earned it. The second set went even smoother than the first. Dean opened with a song that had everyone singing along. let the band take a long showcase that had people applauding after every solo and closed with a ballad that left the room quiet and satisfied in that particular way people get when they've been given exactly what they didn't know they needed. The applause was warm, sustained, the kind that came from genuine appreciation rather than obligation. When the lights came up for the final time and Dean took his bow, the applause lasted long enough that he had to come back out for an encore he hadn't planned on doing. He gave them one more song, something simple and sweet, and when he finally walked off the stage for good, the club manager was waiting in the wings with a look that was half relief and half genuine admiration. "You handled that better than anyone I've ever seen," the manager said quietly. "Most performers would have stopped the show or pretended nothing was happening. You found a way to do both and make it look effortless." Dean shrugged, pulling a towel around his neck to catch the sweat that always came after a performance. "It's not about being perfect," he said. "It's about reading the room and making the best call you can with the information you've got. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you don't, but you can't let the fear of making the wrong choice keep you from making any choice at all." "Still," the manager said, "not everyone could have pulled that off." "Maybe," Dean said, "but I think you'd be surprised what people can do when they stop worrying about looking good and start focusing on doing right." He left the venue an hour later, after signing a few autographs and shaking hands with the staff and making sure that word had come back about the guest who'd collapsed. He was fine, home safe with his wife, embarrassed but grateful. Dean walked out the back exit into the cool night air, and the city stretched out around him in all directions, lights and noise and 10,000 other small dramas playing out in rooms just like the one he'd left behind. The thing about performing, Dean thought, as he climbed into the car that would take him back to his hotel, is that people assume it's about the voice or the presence or the ability to remember your lines and hit your marks. And sure, all of that matters. But what really separates a performer from someone just going through the motions is the ability to stay present when the script falls apart, to read the room, to make a decision in real time with incomplete information and then commit to it fully, without second-guessing, without letting the audience see the doubt. He thought about Carl's face in that hallway, the exhaustion and relief mixed together, and he thought about the man who'd collapsed and how close that whole situation had come to going sideways. If Carl had waited even 30 seconds longer to signal, if Dean had misread what he was trying to communicate, if the medical staff hadn't been positioned where they could reach the guest quickly, any one of those variables, shifting just slightly, and the whole night could have been remembered for all the wrong reasons. But it hadn't. They'd all done their jobs. They'd paid attention, communicated across the noise and the distance and the pressure, and they'd kept each other safe. That was the real skill that nobody taught you in singing lessons or acting classes. The ability to work as part of a team, even when you were standing alone in a spotlight with 5,000 people watching your every move. That's the job. Not just singing the songs or telling the jokes, but holding space for 5,000 people to forget their problems for a few hours, and making sure that when they walk back out into their lives, they're carrying something good with them instead of something broken. Years later, people who were in that club on that particular night would tell the story in different ways. Some remembered it as the night Dean Martin stopped his show to save someone's life, which wasn't quite accurate, but it made for a good story. Others remembered it as the night they saw a performer handle a crisis with such smooth professionalism that it almost looked easy, which was closer to the truth, but still missed some of the weight of what those 2 minutes had actually required. But the people who really understood what they'd witnessed that night were the ones who'd been paying close enough attention to see the small things, the way Dean's eyes had shifted before anyone else knew something was wrong, the way he'd bought time without making it obvious that's what he was doing, the way he'd kept the room calm and the night intact while still making sure someone got the help they needed. Those were the people who understood that what they'd seen wasn't magic. It was skill. It was experience. It was the quiet competence of someone who'd spent decades learning how to read a room and make the right call under pressure, and who decided a long time ago that the audience's experience mattered more than his own comfort or his need to look like he had everything under control. Because the truth is, nobody has everything under control. Not performers, not technicians, not audience members, not anyone. Life is unpredictable and messy and full of moments where you have to make a choice without knowing for sure if it's the right one. But what separates people who handle those moments well from people who don't is the willingness to act anyway, to trust your gut, to do the best you can with what you know, and to keep showing up even when you know there's always a chance that tonight might be the night something goes wrong. Dean Martin showed up every night. He read the signals, he made the calls, and most of the time he got it right. On the nights when he didn't, and there were some, he learned from it and tried to do better next time. That's all any of us can do. Show up, pay attention, make the call, take care of each other when things go sideways. And when it's over, whether it went well or not, you walk back out into the night and you get ready to do it again tomorrow. Because that's the job. And if you're lucky enough to be good at it, if you're lucky enough to have people trust you to do it well, then you owe it to them to keep doing it with everything you've got for as long as you're able. Dean understood that. He'd always understood that. And on that particular night, in that particular nightclub, 5,000 people got to see exactly what it looked like when someone who understood the job did it right.